The December wind howled across the Yorkshire moors with a ferocity that seemed to carry voices from another world when the telegram arrived at Baker Street, summoning us to one of the most perplexing cases of Sherlock Holmes's distinguished career. The message was terse but urgent. Death at Devil's Elbow. Local authorities baffled. Your immediate presence required. Train tickets arranged. Inspector Gregson. Holmes read the telegram twice, then gazed out at the grey London morning with that particular gleam in his eye that indicated a problem worthy of his singular talents. "Watson," he said, folding the telegram carefully, "pack your warmest clothes and your service revolver. We're travelling north to Yorkshire, to a place called Devil's Elbow, a name that suggests either geological peculiarity or local superstition, possibly both. Either way, Inspector Gregson would not summon us unless the case presented features beyond ordinary police work. Before I continue with this most extraordinary case, please subscribe to Detective Sherlock if you haven't already. Your support helps us bring these mysteries to life. Like this video, hit the notification bell, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Now, let us proceed with the dark mystery of Devil's Elbow. The journey north took us through increasingly wild and desolate landscape. As our train carried us beyond the industrial cities into the ancient moorlands of Yorkshire, the character of the countryside transformed from cultivated order to primal wilderness. Devil's Elbow, we learned from our railway compartment companion, a travelling wool merchant familiar with the region, was a small village nestled in a dramatic river valley, where the river wharf made a sharp, nearly right-angled turn around a massive limestone outcrop. The bend was so severe and the current so treacherous that locals had long called it Devil's Elbow, claiming the devil himself had twisted the river's course in ancient times. Strange things happen at Devil's Elbow, the merchant told us with evident unease. The gorge is narrow there, the water deep and fast. Rocks jut up from the streambed like teeth. Over the years, more than a dozen people have drowned attempting to cross or falling from the paths above. Some say the place is cursed, that the devil claims a soul every 7 years. Superstition, of course, but it keeps sensible folk away after dark. Holmes listened with polite interest, but offered no opinion on supernatural causation. When we arrived at the small station serving Devil's Elbow, Inspector Gregson himself was waiting with a carriage to transport us to the scene. Gregson looked haggard, his usual confidence shaken by whatever circumstances he'd encountered. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, thank you for coming so quickly," he said as we loaded our luggage. "The case is unlike anything I've encountered. 3 days ago, a man named Edmund Blackthorne was found dead at the bottom of the gorge at Devil's Elbow. At first, it appeared to be a tragic accident. He'd apparently fallen from the cliff path during the night. But the circumstances surrounding his death are so peculiar, so contradictory, that I cannot determine whether this was accident, suicide, or murder. And if murder, the method defies rational explanation." As our carriage wound through increasingly narrow lanes toward the village, Gregson provided the essential facts. Edmund Blackthorne, age 47, had been a geologist from London, conducting a survey of the limestone formations in the area. He'd been staying at the local inn for 2 weeks, spending his days examining rock strata and making detailed sketches and measurements. 3 nights previous, he'd gone out after dinner, telling the innkeeper he wanted to observe the gorge by moonlight for his geological studies. He never returned. His body was discovered the following morning by a shepherd, lying on the rocks at the base of the cliff, the river water swirling around him. The injuries were consistent with a fall from great height, Gregson explained. Skull fracture, broken bones, massive trauma. The local physician ruled it an accidental death. Blackthorne slipped on the treacherous cliff path and fell 70 feet to the rocks below. Case closed. But here's where it becomes inexplicable. He paused as the carriage negotiated a particularly sharp turn. Blackthorne's boots were found 20 feet from his body, neatly placed side by side, as if he'd removed them carefully and set them down. His jacket was discovered folded on a flat rock another 15 feet away. His notebook, which he apparently carried everywhere, was found on a ledge 30 feet up the cliff face, far above where his body lay. And here's the strangest detail. His watch had stopped at exactly midnight, but his body wasn't discovered until 7 hours later. The physician estimates he'd been dead for at least 10 hours when found, meaning he died around 9 o'clock the previous evening, 3 hours before his watch stopped. Holmes's eyes had sharpened with interest. The watch was still on his person when found, in his waistcoat pocket, unbroken. The case wasn't even cracked despite the fall, but it had stopped at midnight precisely, both hands pointing straight up. Most suggestive, Holmes murmured. And you've investigated the possibility of foul play? Thoroughly. Blackthorne had no enemies that we can discover. He'd made no enemies in the village, kept to himself, paid his bills promptly, caused no trouble. His possessions showed no signs of theft or disturbance. His room at the inn was undisturbed. There is no evidence of a struggle at the cliff top. And most importantly, there are no other footprints on the path, only his own, leading to the spot where he apparently went over the edge. Yet you suspect murder, Holmes observed. I suspect something, but I don't know what. The arranged boots, the folded jacket, the notebook on the impossible ledge. These suggest deliberate placement, not the random scattering one would expect from a fall. But how could anyone arrange these items without leaving footprints? How could Blackthorne's watch stop 3 hours after his death? And why would anyone go to such elaborate trouble to disguise a murder as an accident? Then leave clues that make the accident explanation impossible to believe. We arrived at the village of Devil's Elbow as afternoon shadows were lengthening. The settlement was tiny, perhaps 24 buildings clustered around a stone bridge that spanned the river wharf upstream from the notorious bend. The gorge itself was visible from the village centre, a dramatic slash in the landscape where the river had carved through limestone over millennia, creating sheer cliff faces that plunged 70 feet to the churning water below. Gregson led us first to the inn where Blackthorne had been staying, a sturdy stone building called the Shepherd's Rest. The innkeeper, a weathered man named Thomas Grayson, showed us to Blackthorne's room, which had been preserved exactly as the geologist had left it. Holmes conducted an exhaustive examination, studying every item with minute attention. Blackthorne's possessions spoke of a methodical, scholarly man. His geological equipment was carefully organized. Rock hammers, sample bags, measuring instruments, all precisely arranged. His clothing was clean and well maintained. His personal effects were few, but of good quality. On a small desk lay numerous notebooks filled with geological observations, sketches of rock formations, and technical calculations that Holmes studied with particular interest. A man of scientific habits and precise methodology, Holmes observed. These notebooks show meticulous attention to detail, systematic thinking, organized research approach, not the profile of someone who would carelessly fall from a cliff path he'd traversed successfully many times before. Perhaps the moonlight deceived him, I suggested, made the path appear different than in daylight. Perhaps, but note this, Watson. Holmes indicated a page in the most recent notebook. His final entry, made the afternoon before his death. He writes, "Discovered anomalous formation in eastern cliff face. Requires night observation to confirm hypothesis about nocturnal weathering effects. Must investigate after moonrise." So his decision to go to the gorge at night was planned, not impulsive. He went there deliberately to observe something specific. Gregson nodded. The innkeeper confirmed Blackthorne mentioned his plans at dinner that evening. He seemed excited about something he'd discovered, eager to confirm his observations. "Then we must visit the gorge itself," Holmes said. "I need to see exactly where Blackthorne fell, examine the cliff path, and search for this anomalous formation he mentioned. The physical evidence will tell us more than speculation." The walk to Devil's Elbow took us along a narrow track that descended gradually toward the river valley. As we approached the gorge, the landscape became increasingly dramatic. The river wharf, broad and placid upstream, suddenly narrowed and accelerated as it approached the sharp bend. The water, compressed into a channel barely 15 feet wide in places, rushed through with tremendous force, creating whirlpools and standing waves that spoke of dangerous currents and hidden rocks. The cliff path ran along the eastern edge of the gorge, offering spectacular views but requiring careful footing. In several places, the path narrowed to barely 2 feet wide, with sheer drop-offs on one side and vertical limestone walls on the other. It was easy to imagine how a misstep, particularly in darkness, could be fatal. Holmes examined the path with extraordinary care, sometimes crawling on hands and knees to study particular spots, other times standing and gazing at the overall geometry of the gorge. He paid particular attention to a section where the path widened into a small natural platform, apparently the spot from which Blackthorne had fallen, based on scuff marks in the dirt and disturbed gravel near the edge. "Gregson, you said only Blackthorne's footprints were found on this path," Holmes said, studying the ground. "Are you certain no other tracks were present?" "Absolutely certain. We examined the path thoroughly the morning after the body was discovered. Only one set of prints, size 9 boots, matching those Blackthorne wore. The prints led from the village to this spot and stopped here at the edge." "Stopped or were disturbed?" Holmes asked sharply. "Well, the area near the edge was scuffed, as if there'd been movement or a struggle, but no clear prints other than Blackthorne's." Holmes made no comment,
but continued his examination. He studied the cliff edge minutely, the limestone formations around the platform, even the vegetation clinging to cracks in the rock. Finally, he announced he wanted to descend to the river level to examine where Blackthorn's body had been found. Getting down to the gorge bottom required following a steep, treacherous path that switchbacked down the cliff face. The descent was harrowing. At several points, we had to use our hands to steady ourselves against the rock face, and I was grateful for my military training in difficult terrain. Holmes moved with the agility of a mountain goat, his focus entirely on the rock formations and structural features of the gorge. At the bottom, the river's violence was even more apparent. The water rushed past with tremendous force, creating a constant roar that made conversation difficult. The rocks along the banks were wet and slippery, polished smooth by centuries of flowing water. Holmes carefully navigated to a particular spot where chalk marks indicated where Blackthorn's body had been found. "Here, Watson," Holmes said, his voice raised to carry over the water's thunder.
Blackthorn landed here, on these rocks. Note the position. He was found lying on his back, head toward the river, feet toward the cliff. Now observe the rocks themselves. What do you see? I studied the area carefully. The rock showed some bloodstaining, now mostly washed away by the river, but otherwise appeared unremarkable. Just the smooth, water-worn limestone that characterized the entire gorge. I see nothing particularly unusual, I admitted. Precisely, Holmes exclaimed. You see nothing unusual because there is nothing unusual. No impact damage, no fracturing of the rock, no significant disturbance. Yet a man fell 70 feet and struck these rocks with force sufficient to cause massive trauma and death. Such an impact should leave marks: chipped rock, fractured stone, deep indentations. But look, he ran his hand over the surface. The rock is smooth, undamaged except for superficial bloodstaining. Perhaps the rock is exceptionally hard, Gregson suggested. Limestone of this type is relatively soft, actually. A falling body striking with that force and velocity would definitely damage it. Yet we see no such damage. Most curious. Holmes then directed our attention to the locations where Blackthorn's boots and jacket had been found. The boots had been discovered on a flat rock about 20 feet downstream from where the body lay. The jacket had been found folded on another rock 15 feet in a different direction. Both locations were well above the current water level, suggesting they hadn't been moved by the river, but had been deliberately placed. Consider the sequence, Holmes said. Blackthorn goes to the cliff top at night to observe geological formations. At some point, he removes his boots and places them neatly on a rock at the bottom of the gorge. Then he removes his jacket and folds it on a different rock, also at the bottom. Then he somehow positions himself back at the top of the cliff and falls to his death. Or, he paused significantly, someone wants us to believe this impossible sequence occurred. Could he have thrown the boots and jacket down before falling? I asked. Why would he? What possible reason would a geologist studying rock formations have to remove his boots and jacket and throw them into a gorge? Moreover, the placement is too precise. The boots landed perfectly side by side. The jacket was folded with care. These aren't items that were thrown, but items that were placed by hand. Then someone else placed them after Blackthorn fell, Gregson concluded. Yet, we return to the impossible problem of footprints. If someone descended to the gorge bottom after Blackthorn's fall to arrange these items, they would have left tracks on the descent path. We found none, except those made by the shepherd who discovered the body the next morning. So we have items that couldn't have been placed by the victim, but show evidence of being placed by someone. Yet that someone left no trace of their presence. Holmes's attention turned to the high ledge where Blackthorn's notebook had been found. The ledge was approximately 30 feet up the cliff face, accessible only by difficult climbing. Gregson had sent a constable up to retrieve the notebook, and the man reported that the climb was treacherous and required significant skill. The notebook couldn't have landed there by accident during a fall, Holmes observed. It's too far from the trajectory Blackthorn's body would have taken. Someone climbed up and placed it there deliberately. But again, no trace of the climber. No marks on the rock showing where hands and feet found purchase. No disturbed vegetation. We spent another hour examining the gorge from multiple angles, Holmes taking numerous photographs with his portable camera and making detailed sketches in his own notebook. Finally, as the winter afternoon faded toward evening, we climbed back to the cliff top. Holmes spent additional time examining the platform where Blackthorn had supposedly fallen, paying particular attention to the rock face and the formations nearby. "Here," he said suddenly, indicating a section of the cliff face just beyond the platform. "This must be the anomalous formation Blackthorn mentioned in his notes. Observe this striation pattern in the limestone, Watson. It's distinctly unusual. The layers are warped and compressed in a way that suggests intense, localized pressure at some point in geological history." Blackthorn would have found this fascinating. "Could examining this formation have caused him to fall?" I asked. "Possibly, but it doesn't explain the arranged boots and jacket, the impossibly placed notebook, or the mysterious footprint problem." As darkness gathered, we returned to the village. Holmes requested a meeting with everyone who had seen or spoken with Blackthorn during his final day. The gathering was arranged for that evening at the Shepherd's Rest and included the innkeeper, Thomas Grayson, the innkeeper's daughter, Alice, who had served Blackthorn his meals, the shepherd, Samuel Whitmore, who had discovered the body, the village physician, Dr. Hartley, who had examined Blackthorn, and several other locals who had encountered the geologist during his stay. Holmes questioned each person methodically, building a detailed timeline of Blackthorn's final day. The geologist had risen early, eaten breakfast, then spent the morning at the gorge making observations and sketches. He'd returned to the inn for lunch, spent the afternoon reviewing his notes and writing correspondence, then joined the other guests for dinner around 7 o'clock. Multiple witnesses confirmed he'd been in good spirits, excited about his geological discoveries, showing no signs of distress or suicidal intent. After dinner, around 8 o'clock, Blackthorn had told the innkeeper he was going to the gorge to observe the rock formations by moonlight. He'd taken his walking stick and a lantern, but left his heavy coat behind, saying the evening wasn't particularly cold. He'd departed through the inn's front door and walked toward the gorge. That was the last time anyone saw him alive. "Did anyone else go out that evening?" Holmes asked. any other person who might have been near the gorge around the time of Blackthorn's death. The question produced uncomfortable glances among the villagers. Finally, Alice Grayson spoke up hesitantly. My brother Jack went out that evening, around 9 o'clock. He'd been drinking at the inn and left rather suddenly. He didn't return until quite late, well past midnight. "Where is your brother now?" Holmes asked. "Upstairs in his room," Thomas Grayson said, his face troubled. "He's been unwell since that night. He won't speak of where he went or what he saw. Just sits in his room, staring at nothing, refusing to eat properly." "I must speak with him immediately," Holmes said. Jack Grayson's room was small and stuffy, lit only by a single candle. The man himself sat hunched on his bed, a figure of perhaps 30 years, with unkempt hair and a haunted expression. When we entered, he looked up with eyes that seemed to see something beyond our presence. "Jack Grayson," Holmes said gently but firmly, "I am Sherlock Holmes, investigating Edmund Blackthorn's death. I need you to tell me exactly what you saw at Devil's Elbow 3 nights ago." Jack's face went even paler. "I can't," he whispered. "If I tell what I saw, you'll think me mad. The whole village will think me mad." "I promise you," Holmes said, "that whatever you tell me will be treated with respect and consideration. But you must tell the truth. A man is dead, and you may have witnessed crucial events surrounding his death." After a long silence, Jack began to speak, his voice barely audible. "I'd been drinking at the inn. Too much, I'll admit. I'd had words with my father about money, about my future. I left angry and walked without thinking, ending up near the gorge. I know it's dangerous at night, but I wasn't thinking clearly. I was standing on the path, maybe 50 yards from where it widens into that platform, when I saw him, Mr. Blackthorn. He was standing on the platform, holding his lantern up to examine the rock face. He seemed very excited about something, talking to himself, making notes in his book. Then, Jack paused, his breathing becoming rapid. Then I saw something impossible. Where was a second figure with him? I didn't see this figure arrive or hear anyone approaching. It was just suddenly there, standing beside Mr. Blackthorn. But it wasn't a normal person. It was taller than any man I've ever seen, easily 7 feet, maybe more. And it seemed not solid exactly, more like a shadow that had gained dimension, darkness given form. Mr. Blackthorn turned and saw it. I heard him cry out, not in fear, but in amazement, as if he'd discovered something extraordinary. He reached toward this dark figure as if to touch it, and then Jack's voice broke. Then the figure reached out and embraced him. That's the only word I can use. It embraced him like a man embracing a friend. And Mr. Blackthorn just went still. His lantern fell and went out, and in the darkness I couldn't see clearly what happened next. When my eyes adjusted to the moonlight, the dark figure was gone, and Mr. Blackthorne was standing at the very edge of the cliff, swaying slightly. Then he stepped forward, not falling, but stepping deliberately, and went over the edge. I heard the impact far below, a terrible sound, and I ran. I ran back to the village in complete panic, not knowing what I'd witnessed, whether it was real or some alcohol-induced hallucination. The room was silent after this account. Finally, Gregson spoke. "You saw this, but told no one." "Would you have believed me?" Jack asked bitterly. "Would anyone? A drunk man claims to have seen a shadow creature push a geologist off a cliff. They'd have locked me up as mad, or arrested me for the murder itself. So I kept silent and tried to convince myself I'd imagined it. But I can't forget what I saw. That dark figure, the way it moved, the way Mr. Blackthorne reached toward it, as if recognizing something. It wasn't natural. It wasn't human." Holmes questioned Jack extensively about every detail: the figure's appearance, its movements, the exact sequence of events. Jack's account remained consistent, though he acknowledged his intoxicated state made him uncertain about some details. After we left Jack's room, Gregson turned to Holmes with frustration. "A drunken man's testimony about a supernatural shadow creature. This is worthless as evidence and doesn't help us understand what actually happened." "On the contrary," Holmes said calmly, "it helps us enormously." Jack Grayson witnessed Blackthorne's death, though his interpretation of what he saw is coloured by alcohol, fear, and local superstition about Devil's Elbow being a cursed place. Strip away the supernatural overlay, and we have valuable testimony about the sequence of events. Someone was with Blackthorne on that platform. That person, not a shadow creature, but a flesh and blood human, somehow caused Blackthorne to go over the cliff edge. The question is, who was this person, and how did they accomplish the murder without leaving physical evidence? We spent the following day conducting additional investigations. Holmes interviewed every person in the village, seeking anyone else who might have been near the gorge that evening. He examined Blackthorne's correspondence and discovered the geologist had been communicating regularly with a colleague at the British Geological Survey in London, a Professor Marcus Whitfield, about his limestone research. Holmes sent a telegram to Professor Whitfield requesting information about Blackthorne's work and any controversies or disputes in his professional evidence life. The reply came that evening. Blackthorne had recently made a discovery that challenged accepted theories about limestone formation in Yorkshire. His findings, if confirmed, would embarrass several prominent geologists who had published contrary conclusions. Professor Whitfield mentioned one colleague in particular, Dr. Lawrence Pemberton, who had been vocal in dismissing Blackthorne's theories and had apparently resented his younger rival's rising reputation. Professional rivalry, Holmes mused. Strong enough motive for murder in some cases. We must investigate this Dr. Pemberton. Where was he at the time of Blackthorne's death? Additional telegrams established that Dr. Pemberton had been in London, verifiably attending a geological society meeting at the time of Blackthorne's death.
he could not have been the mysterious figure Jack Grayson saw at Devil's Elbow. Yet the motive exists, Holmes said. If Pemberton couldn't commit the murder himself, might he have hired someone to do it? An agent sent to Yorkshire to eliminate a professional rival. On the third day of our investigation, Holmes announced he wanted to visit Devil's Elbow at night, during the same lunar phase and weather conditions that had prevailed when Blackthorn died. He believed something about the nighttime environment, the quality of moonlight, the shadows it created, the way it illuminated the limestone formations, might provide crucial insights. As midnight approached, Holmes, Gregson, and I made our way to the gorge. The moon was full, providing surprising illumination across the landscape. When we reached the cliff path, Holmes positioned himself on the same platform where Blackthorn had stood during his final observations. "Gentlemen, observe," Holmes said, pointing at the cliff face. "In daylight, we see the striation patterns Blackthorn found interesting. But now, with moonlight striking the limestone at this particular angle, observe what becomes visible." I stared at the rock face and gasped. In the moonlight, a pattern emerged that hadn't been visible during the day. Dark streaks and patches that formed what appeared to be a massive face or figure, carved or naturally formed in the rock. The moonlight and shadows created an illusion of depth and dimension, making the face seem almost three-dimensional, almost alive. "My God," Gregson breathed. "It looks like a giant face watching us from the rock." "Precisely," Holmes said. "This is what Blackthorn discovered and came to observe by moonlight. Not a shadow creature, but an optical illusion created by the interplay of moonlight and natural limestone formations. Blackthorn, trained in geology, would have recognized this as a remarkable example of pareidolia, the human tendency to perceive faces in random patterns combined with specific lighting conditions. But Jack Grayson saw a figure standing beside Blackthorn, I protested. Not a face in the rock. Did he? Holmes challenged. Or did he see Blackthorn's excitement at observing this phenomenon, see him reach toward the rock face as if to touch the illusory face, and in his intoxicated state interpret this as Blackthorn reaching toward an actual figure? Remember, Jack said the figure seemed to embrace Blackthorn. What if Blackthorn simply moved closer to the rock face to examine it more carefully? And from Jack's distant vantage point, this appeared to be an embrace. But that doesn't explain how Blackthorn ended up going over the cliff, Gregson objected. Or the arranged boots and jacket, or the notebook on the impossible ledge. Ah, Holmes said with satisfaction. But it explains something more important. Blackthorn's state of mind and his intentions that night. He came here specifically to observe and document this remarkable optical phenomenon. Everything else follows from understanding that motivation. Holmes spent the next hour conducting an elaborate series of observations and experiments. He examined the cliff face from multiple angles, took measurements, made detailed sketches. He studied how the moonlight interacted with the limestone, how shadows shifted as clouds passed across the moon, how the illusion of the face in the rock appeared and disappeared with changing light conditions. Finally,
He turned to examine the platform itself more carefully. Using a magnifying glass and his pocket torch, he studied the rock surface inch by inch. Near the edge, he stopped suddenly and knelt, examining something minutely. "Gregson, bring your lantern here," he commanded. "Look at this and tell me what you see." We crowded around as Holmes indicated several small, shallow indentations in the rock near the cliff edge. They were barely visible, even with direct light. Shallow depressions, perhaps an inch deep and 2 inches across, arranged in a regular pattern. "What are they?" I asked. "The answer to our mystery," Holmes replied. "These are anchor points. Someone drilled holes in this rock, not recently, but perhaps months or years ago. The holes have weathered, filled with dirt and debris, but they're still present. Do you know what these were used for, Gregson?" Gregson studied them carefully. "Climbing equipment? Anchors for safety ropes?" "Exactly, but not for safety, for access. Someone has been climbing this cliff face regularly, using these anchored positions to secure ropes. Not ascending from the bottom, which would be nearly impossible, but descending from the top to reach various points on the cliff face. Likely someone interested in the geological formations, perhaps taking samples or conducting studies that required direct access to the rock face at different heights." "Blackthorne himself," I suggested. "Possibly, or someone else studying the same formations. But here's what's crucial. These anchor points provide the means to explain our impossible evidence. The boots and jacket could have been lowered down on ropes and placed at the bottom. The notebook could have been positioned on that high ledge by someone descending on ropes from above. And most importantly," Holmes paused dramatically, "these anchors could support a system that would allow someone to create the illusion of a fall, while actually controlling the descent of a body." "You're suggesting Blackthorne's death wasn't a fall at all?" Gregson asked. "I'm suggesting we need to find whoever has been using these anchor points, because that person is likely our murderer, or can tell us who the murderer is." The following morning brought a breakthrough. Holmes had been conducting inquiries about anyone in the area with rock climbing expertise or interest in the geological formations at Devil's Elbow. The vicar mentioned that there was an amateur naturalist living in a cottage about 2 miles from the village, a Mr. Silas Blackwood, who had spent years studying the local ecology and geology. "Blackwood," Holmes said sharply. "Any relation to Edmund Blackthorne?" "I don't believe so," the vicar replied. "Though now that you mention it, the similarity in names is curious. Mr. Blackwood is rather a recluse, lives alone, keeps to himself, known to be somewhat eccentric. He's been seen at the gorge regularly over the years, though I don't know the details of his studies." Holmes immediately insisted we visit this Mr. Blackwood. The cottage proved to be a modest stone structure in an isolated location, surrounded by equipment and materials suggesting serious geological and botanical study. When we knocked, the door was eventually opened by a man of approximately 60 years, gaunt and weathered, with intense dark eyes and an air of nervous energy. "Mr. Silas Blackwood?" Holmes asked. "I am Sherlock Holmes, investigating the death of Edmund Blackthorne at Devil's Elbow. I believe you may have important information." Blackwood's face showed complex emotions: surprise, fear, resignation. "I wondered when someone would come," he said quietly. "You'd better come in." The cottage interior was crowded with books, specimens, equipment, and most tellingly, extensive climbing gear, including ropes, harnesses, carabiners, and other specialized equipment. Holmes noted all of this with satisfaction. "Mr. Blackwood, you've been conducting studies at Devil's Elbow for many years," Holmes began. "You installed climbing anchors on the cliff face to facilitate access to various geological features. You've become intimately familiar with the gorge's geography and the phenomena that occur there under different lighting conditions. And I believe you knew Edmund Blackthorne, perhaps better than you've admitted to anyone." Blackwood sat heavily, as if a great weight had settled upon him. "Yes," he said simply. "I knew him, though we'd never met in person before that final night. I'd been following his career for years. You see, Mr. Holmes, Edmund Blackthorne was my son." This revelation produced stunned silence. Finally, Holmes spoke. "Explain, please." The story that emerged was both tragic and complex. 30 years earlier, Silas Blackwood had been a promising young geologist with a bright future. He'd married and had a son, Edmund, but Silas had developed what today might be recognized as mental illness, severe anxiety and obsessive tendencies that had destroyed his career and his marriage. His wife had left him, taking their young son and forbidding any further contact. She'd remarried and given Edmund her new husband's surname, Blackthorne instead of Blackwood. "I lost everything," Silas said, his voice heavy with old pain. "My career, my family, my son. I retreated here to this isolated place and devoted myself to solitary study. Over the years, I followed Edmund's career from a distance, read his published papers, tracked his professional achievements. He became everything I'd failed to be: successful, respected, brilliant. I was proud of him, even though he didn't know I existed. When I learned he was coming to Devil's Elbow to study the limestone formations I'd been observing for decades, I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to reveal myself, to finally meet my son as an adult, to share my own findings with him. But I was afraid of his rejection, afraid of bringing my mental illness shame into his successful life." "So you watched him from a distance?" Holmes prompted. "Yes, I observed his work at the gorge, saw his excitement when he discovered the moonlight phenomenon, the face in the rock that only appears under specific lighting conditions. I'd known about it for years, but seeing his scholarly excitement at discovering it made me so proud. That night, the night he died, I finally worked up the courage to approach him, to reveal who I was." Tears streamed down Blackwood's face now. "I went to the gorge after dark, used my climbing equipment to descend to various points where I could observe him. I wanted to see his reaction to the moonlight effect before I approached. And I saw how passionate he was about the discovery, how carefully he was documenting it. It reminded me of myself at his age, before the illness destroyed me. Finally,
I climbed back to the platform where he was standing. I approached from behind. He was so focused on the rock face, he didn't hear me. When I spoke his name, he turned, and Mr. Holmes, the look on his face, it wasn't fear or anger, it was wonder. He'd somehow recognized me, perhaps from old family photographs, perhaps from family resemblance. He knew who I was immediately. We talked, really talked, for perhaps an hour. I told him about my work, my years of study, my observations of the gorge. He was kind, understanding. He didn't reject me. He wanted to know about my research, to incorporate my findings with his own. For 1 hour, I had my son back. It was the happiest hour of my life. But then what happened? Gregson asked. Edmund wanted to get his equipment from
his pack, more notebooks, a better lantern. He moved toward the edge of the platform to retrieve his bag, which he'd set down near the cliff edge. It was dark, despite the moonlight, and he'd been so focused on our conversation that he'd forgotten exactly where the edge was. He stepped back, just a single step, and there was nothing beneath his foot. He fell backward over the edge before I could grab him. Silas buried his face in his hands. I heard the impact below. I knew immediately he was dead. No one could survive that fall. I should have raised the alarm, should have called for help, but I panicked. I knew how it would look, the reclusive, mentally unstable father appearing after 30 years, immediately followed by his successful son's death from a fall. They'd think I killed him. They'd think it was murder. So you arranged the evidence to make it appear, what? Not to fall? Holmes asked. I didn't know what to do. I was in shock, grieving, terrified. I thought if I removed some of his effects, made it look mysterious rather than like a simple fall, it might create enough confusion to prevent anyone from connecting me to his death. I used my climbing equipment to descend to where his body lay. I removed his boots and placed them on a rock. I don't know why, except that he'd mentioned they were uncomfortable and he'd been thinking of changing them. I folded his jacket because I'd always taught him to care for his clothing. I positioned his notebook on that high ledge where I often rested during my climbs. I thought these strange details would create a mystery that led investigators away from a simple fall. But they did the opposite, Holmes said. They made your son's death appear to be murder, not accident, and they led me directly to you. I know, Silas said miserably. I realized my mistake too late. I've been waiting for you to arrive, knowing the truth would eventually come out. That's one more detail, Holmes said. Edmund's watch had stopped at midnight, 3 hours after his death. How do you explain that? Silas looked confused. His watch? I never touched his watch. If it stopped at midnight, I don't know why. Perhaps it was damaged in the fall and stopped later. Or perhaps he'd wound it incorrectly. Holmes considered this, then nodded slowly. That's actually the most plausible explanation. The watch stopping at midnight is coincidence, not evidence. Sometimes, Watson, the most mysterious details are simply random chance, given significance by our desire for pattern and meaning. The resolution of the case required careful navigation of legal and ethical complexities. Silas Blackwood's actions, removing evidence, disturbing a death scene, failing to report the accident, were technically criminal. But his motivations stemmed from panic and grief rather than malicious intent, and there was no evidence he deliberately caused his son's death. Inspector Gregson, after consulting with his superiors and reviewing all the evidence, determined that Edmund Blackthorne's death was accidental, a tragic fall from the cliff path at Devil's Elbow. Silas Blackwood was charged with interference with a death investigation and failure to report an accident, relatively minor offences that reflected his panicked response rather than genuine criminality. At the subsequent legal proceedings, the full story emerged publicly. Silas's mental health struggles, his decades of isolation, his silent pride in his son's achievements, and the brief reunion that ended in tragedy created a narrative that generated more sympathy than condemnation. The magistrate, recognizing the extraordinary circumstances and Silas's genuine remorse, imposed a suspended sentence, with the requirement that Silas undergo medical treatment for his anxiety and isolation. The law has been served, though perhaps not in the way we initially expected, Holmes observed as we prepared to return to London. Edmund Blackthorne's death was indeed a tragedy, but it was an accident compounded by his father's panicked attempts to distance himself from the event. Sometimes the most mysterious crimes turn out to be not crimes at all, but accidents overlaid with human fear and desperation. Before we departed, Holmes arranged for Edmund Blackthorne's geological notes and findings to be sent to Professor Whitfield at the British Geological Survey, along with Silas Blackwood's decades of observations about the Devil's Elbow formations. Together, the combined work of father and son would constitute a significant contribution to understanding Yorkshire's limestone geology. At least Edmund's work will be completed and published, Holmes said, and Silas's contributions will be recognised alongside his son's. In death, they achieved the professional collaboration they never had the chance to pursue in life. Several weeks after our return to London, a package arrived at Baker Street. It contained a published paper in the British Geological Survey Journal titled Optical Phenomena in Yorkshire Limestone, the Devil's Elbow Formation, authored by Edmund Blackthorne, with additional contributions by Silas Blackwood. The paper documented the remarkable moonlight effect that had drawn Edmund to his death, the illusory face that appeared in the cliff under specific lighting conditions, explained through analysis of mineral composition, surface weathering patterns, and optical geometry. Science advances through such discoveries, Holmes commented, reading the paper with interest. Edmund Blackthorne came to Devil's Elbow to study an unusual geological phenomenon. He found that, and he also found, briefly, his lost father. The moonlight illusion that revealed a face in the rock also revealed a family connection thought lost forever. There's poetry in that, Watson, even if the poetry ends in tragedy. The case of the death at Devil's Elbow entered my notes as one of the most emotionally complex investigations Holmes ever conducted. It demonstrated that not every mysterious death is murder, that not every strange circumstance indicates crime, and that sometimes the truth is simply tragedy. Human tragedy born of broken families, mental illness, fear, and the desperate actions people take when confronted with grief they cannot process. The case also illustrated how physical evidence must be interpreted carefully, how unusual details can be the result of panic rather than calculation, and how the desire to find pattern and meaning can lead investigators astray if they're not careful to separate genuine clues from coincidental details. Devil's Elbow remains a dangerous and dramatic landmark in Yorkshire, its gorge still claiming lives through careless accidents, and its local reputation for being cursed persisting among the superstitious. But for those who know the full story, it's also the place where a father and son achieved one brief hour of connection after 30 years of separation, and where moonlight on limestone created an optical illusion so remarkable it drew a geologist to his death and revealed truths about family, loss, and the desperate measures people take when faced with circumstances beyond their control.